Good morning, folks. The real Captain Kirk here, live from the Trend 360 studio here in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. It is the 26th of August. Hard to believe. A lot of folks say, why do you say the real Captain Kirk? Because I was the real Captain Kirk back in the day, some 30 years ago, dating myself. Worked with this pretty famous general briefly. And again, it's kind of the inspiration for how we think differently when it comes to predicting year-ahead weather. Again, very different than what most folks do. A lot to cover here today, and Angelina chasing a balloon at the end. So we'll go warp speed this week. Again, hard to believe we're talking almost into early September here, but max temps on the right versus average, cooler than last year. 6th coolest in 30 years nationally, so below average. Cool in the eastern two-thirds and hot in the west. Rainfall similar to last year, still 11th wettest in 30 years, so above average. Everyone's obviously concerned about the Labor Day weekend here, and I'm sure folks got a lot of good plans, but cool in the Midwest, Great Lakes Northeast, and hot in the Pacific Northwest, Northern Rockies. Overall, we'd say it's cooler than last year's holiday and 8th coolest in 30 years, so by no means a hot one for, again, most of the country except the Pacific Northwest. Driest in 4 years, so good news there. 8th driest in 30 years, so below average. Maybe some storms to contend with in the central U.S. and the southeast, but overall not too bad. We are entering the peak of the hurricane season. September 10th is usually the historical peak. This peak this year is probably going to be on the lower end of the scale here, we believe. Again, not seeing a ton of activity, although we do have to watch here. Tropical Storm number 4 Dorian has formed. He's got a lot of headwinds here, to say the least. It's going to be tracking, most of the models on the right here keep it as a tropical storm, maybe a Cat 1, but as it goes over the Hispaniola Mountains, which are well over 10,000 feet, that'll get sheared apart and then maybe head in the direction of Florida as we get toward the holiday weekend here. So something to watch, but again, not overly concerned, but again, we do obviously need to watch it. The other inhibiting factor is just the ocean temperatures off of Africa are below normal. In fact, the tropical Atlantic is just near average. So not blistering hot water temperatures out there, so that's not a huge positive. Above normal in the North Atlantic, so that's where, again, closer into the U.S., we may get some activity here as we enter the peak. So we have to watch those systems that can flare up real quick off the East Coast. And then the map on the right is dust. Just a lot. Dorian formed in the middle of the dust-free area, but again, still a lot of dust coming off Africa, so that's a inhibiting factor. And then if we look at some of these MJO cycle phases, Euro says the tropicals are going to be dead through late September. Phase 4, 5, 6 are not favorable for tropics in the Atlantic. U.S. is a little more bullish. It's still a null phase to maybe a barely phase 2, so maybe something mid-September after Dorian. But again, not looking overly favorable as we go through the peak of the season here. But again, as they say, it only takes one. Looking at the 14-day animation here, we do see a couple things coming out there off Africa, but fish storms. So again, Dorian's the only one to worry about right now for the East Coast and particularly Florida. As we look at the week ahead here, next week, first week of September, 2 through 8. Similar to last year, a little bit warmer. 8th warmest in 30 years nationally, above average, and again, drier than last year, but still 6th wettest in 30 years for the nation as a whole. If we look at the world aggregate here for the 2-week period here, max temps versus average on the right. So cool in the U.S. and Canada. Canada's still the coolest in 9 years. U.S. 6th coldest in 30 years for this 2-week period. Europe the warmest in 3 years. Brazil 9th warmest in 30. So it looks hot down there in Brazil, and it is, but again, only 9th warmest for the past 30. Australia warmest in 5 years. And precip on the left there shows versus average. So all those dry browns and peaches colors are below average. So again, not a lot of activity in the tropical Atlantic, at least for now. Eagle Eye Angelina was in the backyard and we're playing, and she says, there he is, and she sees this balloon, a speck. You pretty much had to get the binoculars out to see it. So the first thing you do before you can do any kind of balloon chasing, again, I was back in the day in the Air Force days, I did some weather storm chasing, so I had some experience, but little one knows to check Daddy's weather, she calls it, Weather Trends 360's Pro app, weather app. So we check that to check the winds, and then we jump in the car, and then we start our balloon chasing here. So again, we found him, as we headed past the cement factories. She's constantly looking to chase and see him through the sunroof there, and then we see him out here. He was going this way and that way, so it was kind of challenging to catch him, but we eventually caught him, landed in a farm field in someone's backyard. So it was cute to see her, how excited she was to see it up close. She actually knew it was green, yellow, and white when it was a speck in the sky, so it was, she was right. So anyway, we'll end here with her doing our little happy dance as we watch the balloon. So with that, folks, we'll talk to you next week.